Hi guys, welcome to Chapter 18, Conservation of Biodiversity. We are looking at how we can stop organisms from really going extinct, but also preserving biodiversity in any means. Remember that biodiversity has a wide definition. It can be talking about species diversity or genetic diversity. So there's more than biodiversity means a lot of different things. Okay. All right, so we're currently in the sixth mass extinction, meaning that more species have gone extinct in the past 150 years or so than previously. And it says sixth mass extinction because we know of 5 other times that organisms have very quickly gone extinct. During the sixth mass extinction, this one is completely brought on by humans, and that's something that we know, mostly due to habitat loss, but it's completely brought on by humans. Okay. Right. So we want to conserve genetic diversity for a couple different reasons. Genetic diversity meaning how many genes are available for one species or in the one gene pool. No, Katie, I'm just making a recording, okay? You want to say hi? No. Okay. I forgot what I was saying. Sorry, guys. So scientists want to conserve genetic diversity so the species can survive environmental change and inbreeding will not occur. There's really a lot of examples of inbreeding amongst organisms when the population gets too small that weakens the organisms. So as the environment does change, which we know is happening all the time now, these organisms could survive. A great example of this would be like the wolves on Isle Royale. That's a good one to look up. The wolf population on Isle Royale. It's an island in Lake Superior, and there was a small population of wolves, but they were sickly. They were small. Their population was declining because they weren't able to catch the moose very easily. So what happened was one wolf came over from the mainland, just swam over, and suddenly it became the wolf pack leader, the dominant wolf. It was a lot bigger than the wolves that were there. And that wolf had pups with the other wolves, and the pups were a lot stronger. So just infusing one other wolf's DNA really strengthened the entire population of the island. It was only like about, I think, in between 20 to 30 wolves. So it's not like a giant number, but it still made a difference. And so the inbreeding depression occurs when individuals with similar genotypes, generally relatives, can breed with each other. They're not like humans, they don't know. So the lower the population, the more likely that they're going to breed with close relatives. It's just that simple. Florida panther is another great example, similar to the wolves on Isle Royale. Population very small, so that's causing a lot of inbreeding. Population's getting weak. The weaker the population, the smaller it's becoming more rapidly. So they brought over a couple of panthers from Texas, and it rebounded. I also want you to look at that picture and note how small the panther is. Those panthers are a lot smaller than we would typically think of a panther, as most southern species are smaller because they can be due to body heat ratios. Categories of endangerment. So we go from extinct to threatened to near threatened to least concern. And so you're starting with the more serious and going to least serious. Extinct, no known individuals. Okay. I like the known part because there's been examples of organisms that we thought were extinct. And then we're like, oh, look, there's one, there's two, there's three. Maybe it's not extinct. Probably it will be soon, but still, it's good to know. Threatened species have a high risk of extinction in the future. Near threatened are they likely to become threatened in the future. And then least concern, species are widespread and abundant, not something we need to worry about. If you look at 3 different categories of animals, this is since 1980. Who has declined the most? It's going to be amphibians. Amphibians have more specialized habitats than a lot of the other organisms that could play a role in that. Also, amphibians are dependent on water, so that could also play a role, why they seem to have the highest percentage of threatened species. you know. All right, so HIPCO means they're the many causes of declining biodiversity. So 5 major causes of declining biodiversity right there. It just really helps you to remember. These are great things to remember for your part 2s when you have to write about it. They might be talking about habitat loss and they'll say, name 2 other types of, 2 other reasons biodiversity might decrease. So if you have these in your head, you'll have invasive species. You're going to need to name a specific type of pollution. Climate change kind of always works. It's pretty general. And many of the species are over-harvested, although not all of them. So for most species, the great cause of decline and extinction is habitat loss. And that does make sense. Humans take up a lot of space. And when we're taking up space, we're taking habitats away. Organisms don't necessarily like to live on our suburban green lawns. And suburbia is the biggest form of habitat loss. Those everywhere we live, the neighborhoods, over and over. Then most species require specialized habitats, though the specialists are going to have a harder time surviving. So they're particularly prone to population declines, especially when their favorite habitat is limited. A lot of this is also going to happen in places like wetlands, marshes, mangroves, because those are specialized habitats. And not only are we filling them in and fragmenting those habitats, but also they're facing sea level rise on the other side. So they're definitely losing their habitats. And again, mostly it's due to human development. This is a forest, in Old Growth Forest, Mount Rainier National Park in Washington State. It's a habitat for spotted owls. And if I remember correctly, or if I have the right perception, I do believe this is actually where the word tree hugger came from. To preserve the spotted owls, people were protesting the loggers, and they were literally hugging trees, and that's where that came from. And that was in say late 1980s. So habitat loss, it's interesting when you look at the dark green areas, that there has been a recent increase in some places of forested areas. A lot of this has to do with abandoned farms. So going from a farm back to a forest. The places that we have to worry about are the red ones, most notably in Brazil and Indonesia. That's rainforests, right? So if we're cutting down rainforests, remember rainforests do not easily recover, mostly because of their very thin soils. So once the trees are gone, it rains, erosion takes the soil away, the rainforest trees cannot grow back. You're going to do a whole poster project on invasive species. I want you to have one in your back pocket. You might want to look for a local invasive species, one that's going to affect us here on Long Island. That would be kind of cool, I think, because you'll see them everywhere once you realize. So the opposite of invasive is a native species. Now, native species are species that live in their historical range, typically where they've lived for thousands or millions of years, typically where they were without any human intervention. Alien species or exotic species are species that live outside their historical range. Note that alien or exotic species are not necessarily invasive if they pose no harm, no threat, and live in the exact spot they're put, then they're not really considered invasive. Invasive are when they become spread rapidly across large areas. Kudzivine, zebra mussel, silver carp are famous examples. We're going to see 2 of these on the next slide here. All right, so kudzu. I think I've told you guys this before, but when I was in college, a senior in college, a professor of mine took the class out to one clearing in the area, and this vine was growing up every single tree. And he said this vine is such a fast growing vine, and it's suffocating these trees because it's actually able to block out all of the sunlight from the trees. And it grows up the side of the tree, all the way up the canopy, and on every single branch, and will just go across the canopy on these trees. It's a native from Japan, and people actually brought it over to stabilize hillsides because it's such a fast growing vine. And stabilize hillsides to stop erosion, and it started to just grow up the trees. It's typically a southern vine. And the thing was, when I was in Richmond, that's where I went to college, it was like, he's like, look, it's made it up here. It's come up this far. If you drive up and down 95 now, which, many of you will when you go to college, but if you drive up and down 95 now, you'll note that it's all the way as far as New Jersey now. And that was only in 20 years. So it's actually expanding its range of tolerance, which is why it's a really scary thing, because we can't control it. The best thing we can do is go rip it out. But that's not necessarily easy either. Then down here, these are the zebra mussels, and you can see why they're called zebra mussels, because they're striped. They are freshwater mussel, and they were brought over in the ballast of a boat. You guys should remember, ballast water is when they take the cargo out, but they need the boat to sit correctly in the water, so they add water into the boat, and then the boat sits correctly in the water, and it goes over the next port. It drops off the ballast water and picks up cargo. The problem with dropping off ballast water is that you are dropping off larvae of organisms that are really teeny tiny zooplankton swimming around in there. And then they grow up to be, whatever they're going to be. In this case, zebra mussels. This is a problem in the Great Lakes. Huge problem. They grow over everything, boat engines, they grow on top of everything. But the biggest issue here, besides, blocking out other organisms, is that they are such effective filter feeders that they're taking all of the phytoplankton out of the water and competing completely with the native species. So leaving no food in the water for other filter feeders. Right. This is interesting because this is the Nordic countries, but 3 different habitats: terrestrial, freshwater, marine. And I like it because it shows different organisms that live in different places. So when you look at land, terrestrial, it's mostly going to be plants and fungi, bryophytes that are going to be your invasives, because that's the easiest place for them to grow. When you look at freshwater, you're looking mostly at vertebrates, so you're looking at fish, mostly. And when you look at the marine organisms, you're looking at mostly invertebrates. Different types of probably filter feeders, whether it's a bivalve or a sponge or other things like that. So they're all different, but they're definitely one thing that's common in all 3 graphs is they're increasing. Why are they increasing? Because human movement. We're going to different places and we're bringing these things with us. And it's sometimes invasive species are introduced accidentally, sometimes it's on purpose. Give me one. Oh, let me go back to invasive species. I want to talk about a couple different examples here. So for purple loosestrife is another great example. People brought it over because it's beautiful and it grows in wetland areas. And what it's done is taken over waterways and completely clouded them out. That's why a lot of times in lakes and things, there'll be actual signs that say, hey, wash your boat. You can't put your boat in here unless you wash it. And there'll be a hose to rinse off your boat, kayak, whatever, before you even put it in the water. Because if you're going from lake to lake, you might actually have some seeds or whatnot from the previous lake to spread this stuff. Another really cool example of an invasive species is the cane toad. Cane toad is not a local one. This is one from Australia. Cane toads came over from Asia, and they were brought on purpose because they were growing sugar canes, but they were having a lot of beetles called cane beetles eating the sugar cane. So to control the beetle population, they brought over these toads from Asia. These toads, I actually saw one in Florida recently when I went to see my parents, and they're giant, guys. They're like, if you put your both hands together and make a circle, that's how big a cane toad is. That's what I'm doing right now, but you can't see me. But anyway, they're funny looking too. There's a really very dry video series on YouTube. If you Google cane toad, it will come up. It's very funny. But anyway, the cane toads, they controlled the beetle population. That was great. But they took over because there was no natural predators of them, and nothing knew how to eat them because they produce a poison. It's actually where the licking came from, toad licking. The poison actually was a hallucinogen. So they had a problem with teenagers in Australia actually licking the cane toads and getting some of the hallucinogen in them. But there was these toads. It's really interesting is there was 4 species of snakes, right? That snakes typically in Asia would eat the cane toads. That's what would keep the population down. But the snakes had 4 different reactions to the cane toads. You had one species of snake that went extinct because they kept trying to eat the cane toads and they kept dying. So that species went extinct. They didn't have the genetic diversity to deal with the cane toad. Another species generally gained a tolerance for the toxin and then were able to eat the cane toad. Not enough of them, though, because cane toads are still out of control. A third species, their mouth actually got smaller. Why? Because then they could only eat smaller cane toads and they weren't getting as much of the toxin, so their bodies were able to deal with it. This also goes back to LD50. And the fourth species, their mouth stayed the same size, but their body got bigger. So again, they were able to deal with it. And I always find it very interesting because it just happens to be like you're working with what you got. Each of those different species of snake was working with its genetic availability, what was there. Okay. So look at your, find an invasive species that's cool. I know one of you guys can do the cane toad. I think Carrie already called the lionfish, but you're going to find one that's cool and has different effects on other organisms. It's kind of crazy. All right. So pollution, obviously, you have to come up with a specific one. If you're going to talk about pollution on a test, you have to be able to name specifically what type of pollution would cause danger to a specific type of organism. So threats to the biodiversity can come from toxic contaminants such as pesticides, heavy metals, acids, and oil spills. 2010, that deep water oil spill decimated the Gulf of Mexico. So it caused a tremendous amount of death across a wide range of animals: sea turtles, pelicans, fish, and shellfish. Sea turtles are all, threatened organisms, except for one that's near threatened. But so just having that kill a bunch of them could really endanger their population. Climate change, that's going to be chapter 19 mostly. But I mean, are we expanding ranges? Are we bringing organisms together that normally wouldn't be together? I heard something really interesting about moose and deer. So the moose live further north than deer, but it's getting warmer and warmer. So the deer have been invading the moose territory. And so there's been a little competition for food, which is kind of bad. But what makes it worse is that the deer carry with them, the ticks of deer carry with them a brain-eating disease, right? Flesh disease. But it doesn't affect the deer. The deer have always had it. They've co-evolved. But now the deer ticks are infecting the moose, and the moose never evolved to have this protection against the brain-eating bacteria that the ticks carry. So all the moose are dying. So these inadvertent effects due to climate change are what we're going to start to see more and more. That's a dodo bird. Obviously, they went extinct. I mean, if you've ever seen Ice Age, you know what I'm talking about. But in all seriousness, we do this. And the question is, especially like when we talk about fish species, we can't see them. So how do we know how many are there? How are we sure how fast they reproduce? But if we don't know how many there are or how fast they reproduce, how can we come up with a number that allows us to harvest them? So American bison was also another great example. The Native Americans ate bison for thousands and thousands of years. It was never an issue. The Europeans came over and they found the bison pretty easy to eat. And they really just took them for their hides. Mostly they weren't, using the whole animal, and they were just killing every single one they could get. All right, so this is some of the laws that we've passed, over the years to try to control this, to prevent endangered species. One of the earliest laws in the United States is to control the trade of wildlife. This is why you really can't own native species. This was first passed in 1900. The act prohibited the transportation of illegally harvesting game animals, primarily birds and animals, across state lines. Then you have CITES. CITES is an international treaty. So it's not an actual law, but an international treaty that you can't bring endangered species to different other countries. This happened in 1973. And it's an agreement between 175 countries around the world. Then there's a red list that the ICUN here, guys, if you follow me here, recording a background tab, so I'm not recording this tab. Okay, so the ICUN is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and so it's basically a nonprofit that is focused on having this red list. This is an interesting thing. So each country has its own way to monitor and regulate the import and export of animals on the list. One of the things you're going to be doing, you're going to find an organism on this list, and you're going to be making a poster about that as well. Doing a little project about it, your endangered species project. Now, the endangered species is interesting because, oh wait, let me back up. I got distracted. Red list, I was going to talk about one in particular. All right, lost my train of thought. I wonder if I can back up here. Hold on a second. All right, now I can't, guys. If I back up, it'll erase everything I've done so far, and I've been talking for 20 minutes. So I'm just going to keep going. You guys are actually used to me forgetting my train of thought, so it's okay. No, I had something cool to tell you, though. Hold on. Oh, it was about piping plovers, okay? So piping plovers used to live across, most of the country, most of the northern part of the country in the summer. And we know they return to us about late May. They're usually fledglings nesting, by June and having babies in early July. The problem is that they like open areas to nest on the beach with nobody around. And I mean, these things are tiny, you guys. I think I told you I was on the beach last summer, and Emily, who's 6, goes, "Mom, look, there's a piping plover." And I was like, no, Emily, that's actually a seagull. Emily was correct. There was a piping plover about 3 feet away from us in a divot of a sand, just a sand with a bunch of footprints on it in one divot. And it was only 3 feet away, but I couldn't see because it had crouched down and it was literally hiding from us. And then it got up and ran off. And then I saw it. If you guys have never seen the short clip, it's on Disney Plus. I know a lot of you have it, but of the piping plover, it's adorable, and you should absolutely 100% watch it. Anyway, the reason I brought this up is obviously they're an endangered species, but if you look at their numbers in New York State, they're actually not endangered, but they're endangered in the Great Lakes, so they're a federally endangered species, which is a problem with having an entire country have one way to monitor it. Maybe we shouldn't have the restrictions that we have on the plovers. Maybe the Great Lakes should keep those restrictions, but not us. Is just, just a thought. Marine Mammal Protection Act. This is to protect whales and dolphins. We're not, and obviously seals and things, but we're not supposed to be killing them. All right, that's basically what this is saying. Please don't kill them. Import or export of any marine mammal body parts. Now that is interesting because you could actually still bring a whole, you have to have the correct permits and stuff, but a whole dolphin into the country. You just can't bring parts of it. Isn't that kind of gross? Anyway, this movie I put down here, The Cove, if you can watch it, if you have a Stars account, it's on there for free. You might be able to watch it for free in other ways because you guys know more things like this than I do. But it's a great movie if you have time. You definitely suggest watching it. It's a documentary. It's kind of old now. I think it was like 2008, I want to say maybe, that it was made. But it talks about a lot of things that we would talk about in class. But, just activism really. But they were killing dolphins in Japan. And this one group of people have decided to try to stop it. And that's what the movie's about. But it ends up talking about a ton of different environmental themes in the movie. You guys might really enjoy the movie. It's good. All right, so Endangered Species Act, first passed 1973. Notice that was also the same passage as, I can't go back this way. I don't know why. Okay, so anyway, that was the same passage as the, wait, why can't I go back? I want to show you something. All right, anyway, the trading endangered species is legal. All right, really simple. You can't have them, you can't harm them. It also worked out to other things such as if you own land, right, you have to leave that land natural if there's any evidence of endangered species on it. Maybe about 20 years ago, my husband's uncle bought property in Florida. 10 years ago, went to go build on it. He wasn't allowed to because the one of the inspectors saw a bald eagle on the property, right? So that's happening there. Bald eagles have made a great comeback. You can actually see them. I've seen one just this past spring over in Sayville. There's definitely been a bunch of sightings of them. Guys, that in my lifetime, is an amazing thing. That would never have occurred. When I was a kid, it was like this mystical organism, the bald eagle. Anyway, they are really becoming to the point where we can take them off the endangered species list. And that is because of all of these restrictions that we put on them to preserve their habitat. Other species have increased in number: American alligator, the gray whale, the osprey. You guys don't realize because you see them at school all the time. But I never did as a kid. And when they first started coming back, it was like absolutely unbelievable to see these great birds like flying around, diving in the water, catching fish. It's incredible. But now they're becoming very commonplace. All right, so in 1992, nations came together and made a treaty to protect biodiversity. This treaty had 3 objectives: to conserve biodiversity, not overuse it, sustainably use it when we need to, right? And then equitably share the benefits that emerge from the commercial use of genetic resources such as pharmaceutical drugs. I really want to recommend another movie to you. It's a very old movie called Medicine Man with Sean Connery. It's very old, but classic. And it really talks about the biodiversity, about why it's important to maintain it, because we don't know what's there. Would be like a really big deal to find what's there when we're chopping down plants in the forest before we even know what those plants can do. You have to realize, like, where do drugs come from? They come from plants. Why? Because the plants make drugs to keep things from not eating them, or to keep things away from them. A great example is hot peppers. Why do they have that drug that makes them spicy? So that nobody eats them, and things like that. So, with that, if it has, those drugs, well, what else can those drugs be used for? Is something that we've, been researching, and there's a lot of research left to do. So we don't want to cut everything down before we know if it can help us. All right. That is chapter 18. Oh, nope. Sorry, it was not chapter 18. I'm not done here. Okay. Sorry, guys. That's where I meant to, I made a note to say, like, if you guys want to stop and take a break, you've been listening to me for 30 minutes which is a long time. I know in class you do that, but in class, we go back and forth a little bit. This is really just me talking. So it's not as fun. I know that you find class very fun. So, this, it's just not as fun. So take a break, shut off the computer, and come back in a little bit and continue it. Right. So size, shape, and connectedness of the protected areas. So one of the best ways, habitat loss is the main way that organisms are declining. So how do we stop that? Well, we have preservations or conservations. So making these areas that can be protected so that we have the habitats can really help the organisms. But what's the best way to do that? Take a giant area like, say, Yellowstone National Park and just preserving it? Or do you have a bunch of little small ones? At this point, in most places, we only have an option to make a bunch of little small ones because we've basically destroyed the other habitats. So when designing and managing protected areas, we must consider how close to another area they should be, how large the area is, and the amount of edge habitat the area contains. Edge habitat is the interface between a forest and, say, a field. So you have shrubs, you have smaller trees, things that have been, trying to get sunlight growing there. So, for example, here we have a lot of edge habitat, and so you get a lot of deer. Deer are usually controlled by food, and if you imagine everywhere is just like a big forest, there's very few undergrowth or understory trees and bushes that have food for the deer. So the deer don't have a lot of food. But when you create a lot of edge habitat, now you're creating a lot of food for deer, hence contributing to overpopulation. That is why we have more deer on Long Island now than we probably did, a few hundred years ago. All right. Guys, we've done a theory of island biogeography, or actually did an Excel lab on it. But they apply to the islands of protected areas as well as to actual real islands. So the size of the islands is important. The greater the island, the higher the biodiversity is. But the distance between them is important, just like the distance from the island to the mainland was important, because you want the organisms to be able to travel through the two places. And if they can't, then you are losing that biodiversity anyway. So islands that are closer together and larger are going to have a greater biodiversity. Single large or several small are two differing approaches to protecting biodiversity of a region. The decision comes down to human development and resource allocation. Like I said, a lot of times we don't have a choice but several small because that's just the land that we have available. And then biosphere reserves, which I find this to be very interesting. A lot of times we talk about preservation versus conservation. And conservation areas, all right, we're trying to conserve, we're not overusing them. People can go in, people can hunt, people can use the land. But preservations, a lot of times people are not even allowed into those areas at all. So those are two different ways we use that. So, and this is kind of what that refers to. So in a biosphere reserve, there's protected areas consisting of zones that vary in the amount of permissible human impact. So you have human settlements out here in the transition area, right? Maybe not that many, but few, far between. A lot of tourism and recreation in that area. And then in the buffer zone, you really just have education and training. So only, certain people are allowed in. You can have some tourism and recreation, but it's going to be a lot more limited. And then here's your research. And then here you just have monitoring, no permanent structures, just, so certain people are allowed in, mostly to study. So minimal human impact is the key there. All right, now we're done with chapter 18. So I'm hoping that wasn't terrible. You guys do have the opportunity to pause and go back and forth. I'm going to put this up on Classroom and expect you guys to each make one comment about it. When you have gotten to this point, you've watched or listened to, I should say, the whole lesson. Could you do me a favor and just put an animal emoji into the group chat? Don't tell anyone why you're doing that. Everyone will figure it out if and when they watch it. All right, and this way I can know that you have watched this to completion. That would really be wonderful. Thank you so much and have a good day. I gotta pause it. Hold on.